Brothers and sisters, I hope you well. Do you know Europe, the same countries that did conquer the continent of Africa, they colonize it, they control it for many, many years. You think that these people will be really good diplomats because they understand basically, the leaders, they understand how to reach deals, peace deals, how to start wars, how to end wars, and this is based on the history. Okay, however, what's happening in Europe today is very concerning. So we have Germany, for example, that is actually saying that they won't be able to pay certain social services. And then you have the UK, for example, that is almost about to ask for a loan from the International Monetary Fund. So all this because they do not want to recognize the fact that they are losing a war, that they started a war against Russia that they could not win. And all this happened under the Biden administration. And please tell me, where is Biden now? He's gone. And as you can see, since Biden is gone, things are changing a lot. I don't know if you remember when the European leaders or the representatives in the United Nations decided to walk away as a protest in a meeting because the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, was delivering a speech regarding the conflict in Ukraine. Instead of sitting down, listen to this guy, and then make decisions, they decided to make a mockery out of it. They just walk away in protest, which is a childish behavior. But the whole world was like, oh, okay. Some people were like clapping. Some people were like, what are you guys doing? That's your job. You're meant to be doing that. Why you live in that room? Anyways, they decided to work. But not only that, they refused to integrate Russia into peace plans that they have in Ukraine. They did that consistently under the Biden administration. And they continue to fund Ukraine with weapons, with money, and everything else, together with the USA, in order to ensure that Ukraine continues fighting against Russia, a nation which cannot win a war by itself against Russia, and not even with the support of the European countries. And we're not talking here about the European countries sending the armies. We're talking about the European countries allowing volunteers to join the Ukrainian army and then use Ukrainian nationals to go and fight against Russia. This is what we call a proxy war. And it's a war that is not nice because you're using someone else's resources. We're talking about human lives here, to go fight a war for your own economic interest. In this case, the economic interest of the US, not necessarily of Europe. Because we can see the effect of this war today. Countries like Germany, they're losing their heavy industries. Countries like the UK, for example, they're about to ask for money from the IMF. Now, as I said before, the EU leaders decided to basically exclude Russia from some of these peace talks, okay? Although they kept saying in the meetings, okay, Russia will need to be included in future meetings, why you didn't include them from the beginning? Because if you remember, in 2022, where the whole war started, and the Russians moved all the way almost to Kiev, and they have 40,000 soldiers marching towards the capital. Yep, 40,000 soldiers marching towards the capital. Apparently, this was like some kind of a strategy. Most of the tracks were empty anyways, but they just disappear when they reached an agreement with Kiev, in which Russia confirmed that they won't be invading. However, Kiev will have to sit down on the table and reach a peace agreement with Russia, which indeed they did. And the Russians move out of the regions they conquer and they move back. Okay? Now, they kept the word, but the EU leaders, Boris Johnson mainly, and the European leaders decided not to stick to the agreement they reached with Russia. And they continue funding Ukraine. In fact, they pushed Ukraine to continue with the war because Ukraine sat down on the negotiating table with the Russians at the very beginning. But something forced them to stop the negotiations and to continue fighting. Okay, Ukraine rearmed and Russia said, okay, let's prepare for a bigger war. And they moved back and they started conquering and keeping every single territory that they took from Ukraine. Ukraine was at that point where they could have said, okay guys, that's it. We don't want war. We keep all our territories. Let's reach an agreement with you in which we're not going to invite NATO into our country. Let's reach an agreement with you in which we're going to respect the rights of the Russian-speaking population in this country, because we've been at war with them since 2014. There was a civil war going on in Ukraine before the war that we know today. Okay? So instead of reaching an agreement with a nuclear superpower which is next door to you and is telling you, you do not bring the US here, you do not bring a massive army here, okay? Because Ukraine shares a massive borderline with Russia, and for Russia, that will be a concerning matter when it comes to security, okay? So that's about, that matter for Russia was about survival, simple as that. And if you come from a colonized country, a country that used to be colonized, you know exactly how they operate. They use your neighboring countries to basically create problems to you, which is exactly what we've seen in Ukraine against Russia today. So they have that chance, but the Europeans decided not to reach a peace agreement with Russia. Not only that, they continue laughing and imposing sanctions, saying that Russia will fall. So they were aiming for regime change in Russia, which it did not happen. Anyone with a bit of intelligence will understand that you cannot change the regime, or whatever you want to call it, the government in Russia, because Vladimir Putin is there. This is the only leader in this world that have 80% popularity in his country. That means 80% of the population in his country love this guy. That's massive. How are you going to try to remove this guy from power? And we know how Western countries operate. They always put themselves as the victims, as the ones that are going to save the whole world. Although many of these are the leaders mainly, okay, the armies, etc., not everyone, but many of these, what they're doing is the complete opposite. They are destroying countries like Afghanistan, like Iraq, like Yemen, like Somalia, and many others. Whilst at the same time, they are basically spreading the word of democracy, of peace, of support for men, for women, for children. But at the same time, they're allowing their own friends to carry out mass atrocities like we can see in the Middle East today. So, these EU and Western leaders, including the US, under the Joe Biden administration, they consistently said that they will not negotiate peace with Russia without Ukraine's consent. But they were the ones giving money to Ukraine. So how can you say that if you are the one making decisions on behalf of Ukraine? That makes no sense. Then Russia was excluded from certain international forums, such as the Ukraine Peace Summit in Switzerland, that was in June 2024, okay? And this gathered about 100 countries and organizations, but Russia and China were not invited. So the aim of this meeting was to build international consensus around Ukraine's peace framework, not to directly negotiate with Russia at that stage, which is really concerning and really strange. Remember, when Ursula von der Leyen used to come out in the UN or the EU meetings laughing about Russia, saying that you're going to cripple your economy because you're using chips from wash machine right now to put into your missiles, to put into your computers or whatever. Look at them now. So you have this walkout at the UN where Russia was speaking. There have been multiple walkouts at the UN by EU diplomats and allies when Russian officials spoke, especially between 2022 and 2023. So these were symbolic protests against the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and it showed diplomatic isolation of Russia, but did not mean EU countries fully abandoned the UN framework, which is what they actually said. But excluding Russia from the negotiations, it was done intentionally to continue with this war, while putting enormous pressure, economic, financial, even social pressure on their own population in countries like the United Kingdom, like Germany, like Spain, and many other European countries. Now, you have Germany today, okay, which have a concern regarding the social benefits, because apparently there's no budget to continue financing this. So Germany, although they have no budget for the social benefits, they have pledged tens of billions of euros in military and financial aid to Ukraine since 2022. And recently, they announced another billions for Ukraine, although the population, they're going to have the benefits cut, the social aids cut. But Ukraine is going to get money in the form of weapons, basically, that they're going to buy from the US and they're going to give to Ukraine. That makes no sense to me. Okay, country, that is not a country. They were not born in Ukraine, but they're going to continue giving billions to Ukraine. Although the US, which was the main country that started all this, by orchestrating a change of government in Ukraine and installing whoever they wish as their transitional government, they just pull out. And the Donald Trump, he was like, nah, this also started by Biden. I'm not going to continue with this. So they pull out, but the Europeans, for some reason, they continue to fund Ukraine. And they justify this to the population by saying that Ukraine is actually defending Europe. If we don't support Ukraine, Russia will take all over Europe and they're going to go all the way to America, take all over America, then all over the world, and then Putin is going to become the most evil dictator you've ever seen in the world. If you believe that. Now, at the same time, Germany is facing domestic budget pressures after 2023 court ruling limited government borrowing. Okay, apparently this is the reason why they're saying that it was a 2023 ruling that is not allowing Germany to use all the budget for these social services that they're planning to cut. So this had led to a lot of debates about social spending cuts in areas like family support, pensions, or green subsidies. Okay, now also in the UK, you have the UK government, the UK economy itself, which is in a really bad situation right now, where if you live in the UK and you're a young person, you see no future there. I'm not talking about those that live well. I'm talking about those that just want to have a decent life. Okay. Now you buy a house in the UK, it's going to cost you around £400,000. And you need to get a deposit for that. You need to talk to your bank. You need to match the affordability criteria for that as well. And there are many people in the UK, mainly young people, that they cannot afford a house in the UK. So the majority of them are renting or they are sharing houses. This is not something new in Europe. In Spain, for example, there was a crisis in, I believe, 2008, where you have many construction companies going completely bust after receiving millions and millions in subsidies or from banks. They built so many houses, there was too much supply, but there wasn't enough demand. So you have young people living in schools and going into the construction industry because they could earn a good amount of money, buy a house and do whatever they wanted to do, right? Well, that did not end that well, because you have many of these companies going bust. Many of these flats that they were constructed, that they were not bought by anyone. They were like ghost towns, basically, full of flats that nobody would buy them. The prices would start going up, but no one could afford it. And then all these young people, many of them that went to the construction industry and all of the other sectors that rely on the construction industries, they found themselves in a crisis. And Spain went down into an economic crisis and many people have to leave the country. So now what we have in the UK is the price of the houses that keeps going up non-stop. Inflation going up as well. People cannot afford it. And all this, although they refuse to say it, is completely linked to the war in Ukraine. Because even before the war in Ukraine started, they were getting ready. You have the energy companies basically increasing the price of energy by 20%. And then when the war started, 1 month before actually, they increased the price of energy by almost 40%. Okay? And now it's over that, way above that. You have people in the UK paying £200 a month just on electricity or gas, which is a lot of money. And not only that, If the price of electricity and gas goes up, the price of food, transportation, everything else goes up. But what's the main problem here is that the salaries did not go up. So due to the sanctions that they imposed on Russia, due to the blow up of the Nord Stream pipelines, okay, and due to all the nonsense that they started to do, now they're not receiving cheap gas and cheap oil from Russia. Therefore, everything has become much more expensive. And although you have the CEOs of big companies, big energy companies making millions, you have the customers that they cannot even afford it. They cannot even afford the tax they pay for their houses, the council tax, and all these things. So this is why the UK right now is in a stalemate. It's not progressing economically. There are many people with knowledge, with the skills. There are many people with the aim to get a good job and contribute to the improvement of the country. However, due to the current situation, many companies are not hiring. Many companies are kicking people out. And then you have AI, you have technology. All of this is also affecting the workforce. Okay, so right now you have a country that has everything you need for progression, but you cannot do it because the price of rent is too high, the price of the house is too high, the price of the food is too high, transportation is too high, the salaries are stagnant. Therefore, people are afraid of having kids. People are afraid of bringing a new generation, and people are becoming much more conservative. And this is why the UK is in a state right now where they kind of force, or they're about to go to the IMF to request a loan that they will bring loads of conditions, such as cut that funding for the NHS services, cut all those services for elder people, some winter warm program that they have where they give money to people so they can afford the electric bill or the gas bill, things like that. They will target all this funding that they provide to their own population in order to pay off this debt that they might get from the IMF. Now, the British government has said that this is not true, and they have blamed everything on the finance minister. But let's see what happens. But as you can see, the European nations were laughing about Russia, saying that we're going to cripple you, we're going to destroy you. But today, they are excluded completely from the peace talks between the US and Russia. Now, the US, after changing the administration, as you can see, they are willing to talk with Russia and talk about peace deals. And what they're doing, they are excluding Ukraine, they are excluding Europe, and they're reaching an agreement. Because from the very beginning, I told you that this was a proxy war. As you can see today, the US deal with Russia because the US is the country that started this, financed this, and forced other countries, along with the US, to continue financing this war. So if there's ever gonna be a peace talk, just like the Russians said in the past, it's going to be with the US, with Ukraine, because Ukraine is no more than a country that's being used for a purpose. But those that actually financed that war, the one that used to finance it the most was the US. So now you have the US and Russia meeting in person, reaching agreements, even agreements where the sanctions are going to be almost removed. And now Donald Trump is trying to force the European leaders to do exactly the same thing, because if they don't do, they will see what happens. So I just wanted to share this with you, brothers and sisters, because sometimes we think that because you're a politician, you're a smart person. But as you can see, the European leaders, they're not smart. Or if they are, what the hell are they doing? I hope you like this video. Like it, share it, bookmark it, and as always, I'll continue informing you.